Alrighty guys, hello and welcome back to the show. Today we are going to be doing a follow-up of the Which Destroyer is Best video, and we're going to be looking at battleships from the various factions. So we're going to be looking at the Halthum, the Galaxy, the Summit, and the Omen class battleships and how they perform in various applications. So we are going to be doing two concrete tests and then looking at each ship a little bit subjectively, because these ships do range a good deal more than the destroyers do from both a resource standpoint and from a peripheral capability standpoint, for lack of a better term to put it. So the two primary tests that we're going to be doing are battleship versus battleship, obviously, and then the second one is going to be battleships versus destroyers. So we're going to be doing a kind of a repeat of the wolf pack of frigates, except in this case we're going to be doing a wolf pack of destroyers against the battleship, and we'll see how the battleships actually fare. Getting into test one, battleship versus battleship. The Omen wins, but barely, in the 1v1 tests, with the Summit coming in as a close second. So even though the Summit has a higher HP at 51,000, the Omen has a much higher DPS, or well, not really a much higher, but a higher DPS at 143 damage per second. This 143 damage per second, if you do the math and take the damage per second divided by the actual health that the guns are going to be subtracting health from, does mean that the Omen is able to edge out by about 18 seconds or so from the battleship, which means that incidentally the Omen survives just barely right before the Summit is able to cycle its guns for the last volley. So the Summit fires on a 20-second timer. Its guns will cycle every 20 seconds, whereas the other battleships in this lineup have much faster fire rates. The reason why I'm notating the damage per second here is the Forged Alliance Forever databases are not 100% accurate or updated. They might have been accurate at one point, but they're not accurate anymore. So in my observations, the Omen pushes out 140 damage per second, different from the 168 that is on the Forged Alliance Forever database. And the Summit puts out 130 damage per second, different from the 150 damage per second, again noted in the Forged Alliance Forever database. Now, to their credit, FAF does say that these are approximate DPS values. In my opinion, though, these seems to be, I would say a 10% variance is a little bit beyond what I would call approximate variations. So I did want to notate that because the damage per seconds were different for these particular classes. I have not noticed the same discrepancy on other units in the unit database, but I did just want to point this out. The Galaxy and the Halthum both have similar discrepancies as well, as noted within the databases. That being said, we wrap up test number one. The Omen is the victor, with the Summit coming in at a close second, with its guns unable to cycle for the final killing shot. The Galaxy and the Halthum are both relatively close together. Test number two is battleships versus destroyers. Now, this is not a fantastic test just because of the way that battleships are designed. They are more designed, in my opinion, as long-range fire support in this particular game, and this game kind of designed them to be mimicking the way that the US designed battleships for World War II and World War I. All that being said, though, it is still a valid test. So the way that we did this particular test is we took 6 Exodus class destroyers. The Exodus, if you remember from our Which Destroyer is Best video, was the best performing destroyer in a ship-to-ship stance on that side of the house. So we took the Exodus destroyer, which comes in at 2,250 mass, multiplied it by 4, and you get 9,000 mass, which is how much an Omen costs. The Summit comes in at 10,000 and the Galaxy comes in at 8,000. So 4 Exoduses puts us right in the middle of the road. We added an additional 2 Exodus to add some stress to the engagement to see how the ships actually play out. And the results were that the Summit actually performs the best here, with 2 destroyers surviving. The other battleships are only able to pull out 4 destroyers surviving. Now, there are a couple of primary reasons for this that you're seeing now on the screen. The Summit has the longest range over the other battleships. So this range allows it to eliminate destroyers before they actually get into range. This also makes it extremely practical whenever you are using battleships as long-range fire support, which you would be using the Summit in, or that would be the application I would recommend using the Summit in. So you have Valiants, Coopers, frigates, things like that, making up the kind of front line of your forces, with the battleships in the rear providing fire support. The second reason why I think it came in first here is it has the highest HP, coming in at 51,000 HP. So the higher HP also allows it to weather the attack a little bit better from the 6 Exodus. So it is a kind of a win-win here. The longer range allows it to deal with the Exodus class destroyers sooner and eliminate them faster, while the higher HP allows it to weather this damage a little bit better. For the rest of the battleships, all of the others were about equal, with 4 destroyers surviving. The Galaxy and the Howtham both have equivalent ranges, coming in at second at, I believe, 120 range, but they both have lower damage. And the Omen is the flip-flop. It has shorter range, coming in at 110, but higher damage, which we discussed a little bit earlier. So the lower damage versus higher range, and then higher damage versus lower range, are balancing each other out for the other 3 factions and how they perform against other ships in the water. So let's get into the subjective factors that differentiate these ships, as well as my 2 cents about these ships. And we'll disclaim this by saying this is 100% subjective. So the first thing, for new players, we gear this channel towards newer players, trying to make this channel as accessible as possible. The first thing that you need to understand is that battleships are not created equal, and these tests do a great job at illustrating that in practical applications. Whenever you are deploying battleships, you have to take into account the range, the variance in damage per second, as well as the variance in HP, as far as whether or not you are choosing to deploy, say, Howthams versus the T3 sub-hunters from the Seraphim. So that is a choice that you are going to be faced with if you are a Seraphim player and you are playing on Settons or any other match where you will end up getting to T3 Navy. Second thing, or really the second thing we want to get to, is the breakdown of subjective values versus the economic impact of these various battleships. So starting out with the cheapest and then going to the most expensive. The Galaxy is the cheapest battleship and offers a fantastic halfway point between range, damage, AA, and it has torpedoes to boot. So it is a really good all-around battleship. It's good in pretty much any situation. It's really good at long-range bombardment of bases. It is very good in dogfights with other ships with its higher fire rate, and it's not going to break the bank at only 8,000 mass, coming in at 80% of what the Summit. And I'm not going to try and do that math on the fly in my head, but it'll come in at less than the Howtham and the Omen. To be fair, it did fare the worst in the battleship versus battleship engagements, not beating any of the other contenders, but I would argue that it has the most versatile applications, being equipped with anti-aircraft, and it has torpedoes, with the fact that it is cheaper. So moving on to the Howtham. The Howtham has the highest fire rate, and it has a modest range. So first and foremost, the biggest subjective difference for the Seraphim T3 battleship is the fact that it has the mobile nuke launcher. So this makes it a incredibly versatile platform for from a game ender perspective, where you can build these battleships and have a very strong presence in the water, and you don't have to invest in the Plan B or other T3 strategic missile submarines and still be able to build strategic nuclear missiles remotely and mobile through these ships. So the Howtham is definitely one to get a serious look. I would say, though, if you're not going for the mobile missile launcher platform, there is a case to be made going sub-hunters instead of the battleship here, for a couple different reasons. The sub-hunters have better AA, I believe, than the battleship, and they also are a little bit cheaper and more efficient to make, while still packing a pretty heavy and serious punch with their torpedoes against other surface vessels. The Howtham is not armed with torpedoes, so this does make it vulnerable to submarines and sub-hunters. So something to keep in mind whenever you are actually deploying the Howtham is what your long-term plan is for the Navy game. Shifting to the Omen, this is the best battleship versus battleship vessel, and we've already talked about this. The reason why is because it packs the highest damage per second out of any of the battleships. Even though it does not pack the highest HP, this damage per second is able to overcome the Summit in this particular engagement. Because of this makes it a fantastic ship-to-ship weapons platform where you're fighting other battleships. What we see in the Aeon Navy, and we saw this with the destroyer, is that the Aeon Navy is much more, instead of versatile multi-tool ships, the Aeon Navy is much more specialized in the way that they deploy their ships. So the Omen, much like the Exodus, is the best ship-to-ship battleship in this particular test. But that means that it comes at a particular cost. So the Omen does not have anti-aircraft, it does not have torpedoes, doesn't have torpedo defense, doesn't have strategic missile launchers, anything like that. I believe it has tactical missile defense, but that's its only real kind of tertiary ability. So the Aeon, again, with the Omen, are exhibiting a much higher specialization with their vessels, which comes with pluses and minuses. On the one side, your Omen, pound for pound, is going to be better than any other battleship in a battleship versus battleship engagement. On the downside, in order to protect yourself against submarines, you're going to have to be building their T2 sub-hunters. In order to protect yourself against anti-aircraft, you're going to have to be building cruisers, etc., etc., etc. So just keep that in mind as you are evaluating, if you are in the beach or cliffs position on Settons, which civilization you actually want to pick, and what fits with your overall playstyle and the way that you like to play the game and the way that you like to progress towards the end game. If you like highly specialized tools, the Aeon Navy, as we've seen through multiple videos now, is looking like a fantastic choice for you. So wrapping it up with the most expensive at 10,000 mass, the Summit. So the Summit, some of its advantages, it has the longest range of any of the battleships out there, which makes it fantastic for long range fire support. It makes it fantastic for base bombardment, and it has the highest HP, coming in at 51,000. So as far as weathering torpedo bomber strikes, weathering battleship engagements, this is going to be a great option for you from both a ship-to-ship combat perspective as well as a long-range base bombardment perspective. So fantastic option here. And this is a little bit of a sidebar, but I think that Gas Powered Games was thinking about a good way to make an ode to history, and I'm a little bit of a history buff, and so to me, I look at the Summit and the way that the battleship actually looks, and to me, I'm just seeing the USS Missouri in my mind. And so I think that whenever Gas Powered Games was building out the Summit, they wanted it to mimic battleships from World War II and World War I, and that kind of era of large dreadnought battleships where you could actually put your head down the barrel of these guns and still have plenty of room to spare as far as the caliber of shells that are actually getting fired out. And the Summit is no exception. So operating on long reload time, high range, high damage, and high impact shells, the Summit really is an ode to World War II and prior dreadnoughts as far as the impact and how it plays into the game. You definitely want to screen these guys though with some additional Valiants or some additional cruisers. Have some battle cruisers in the mix as well. You cannot just crank Summits and expect to win the game because these guys have just such a long reload time. It's not going to be 100% practical. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. Battleships have different applications, which is why you see the pros use battleships in a variable fashion. We talked about this a little bit with the sub-hunters versus whether you should use Halthams, but we also see this a lot in the UEF side of the house, where we often see professional players electing to go for the Neptune battlecruiser instead of going for the Summit battleship. So keep in mind the strengths and weaknesses of these battleships. Battleships are not the trump card up at tier 3, even though they say battleship and these are the biggest, baddest ships on the sail the ocean blue. They come at a heavy cost, and they do have their weaknesses and their downsides. So to wrap up the video there, thank you guys so much for watching. This video is long enough, and I really appreciate you guys watching. If you enjoy what you're seeing here, there's a lot of Supreme Commander content on this channel. There's everything from casts to my ladder matches, my custom games, all additional tests like this one. You can see the destroyer versus destroyer tests, as well as other tests around eco, unit matchups, etc., as well as tutorials. So my primary goal in setting out to do this channel was to make this game as accessible as possible. I've loved this game for a very long time, and one of the things that really tears me up inside is the fact that this game has such a high learning curve because it has a different economic structure than other real-time strategy games, and you have to operate at a higher scale than other real-time strategy games, fielding hundreds of units on a 20 by 20 kilometer map. So my goal with building out this channel was to make this game more accessible to newer players and allow them to break into what I truly believe is the greatest real-time strategy game ever to be made and that includes some of the later games that we've seen come out that try and mimic Supreme Commander. So with that, I will go ahead and stop the video there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.